Time for another inspiring edit session with my favorite software, Premiere Pro. Yeah, let's get that open, shall we? I've had it with this software. I'm moving to Final Cut Pro, that's it. I'm done, I'm moving. Close. Here you go, Adobe, here's your report. I'm moving to Final Cut Pro. What? This? What? Index? What? Index what? What? Look, can you turn orange? Orange. No, it didn't turn orange. Okay, I want to delete this, but wait, what? My clip above it went. What? Oh, I'll just have to stick with the unstable software that is Premiere Pro. I give up.
Whoa, Adam, don't give up. Not just yet. After 10 years of using Premiere Pro, I'd also had enough of the software. And after finally taking the leap over to Final Cut Pro, I have to say that it was one of the most frustrating and annoying experiences that I've ever had. But with some more time and practice with the software, I soon realized how this was one of the best decisions I ever could have made to reignite my love for the art of editing. So in this video, I'm gonna make your transition over to Final Cut Pro as easy as Adobe's been draining your precious creative sanity every day. Guess I've ruined any chance of a brand deal with them by now, right? I still like After Effects, so Adobe, call me, maybe, please? All right, let's dive in. When you open up a new project in Final Cut Pro, it's called a library, which works in the same way as a project works in Premiere Pro, where this is a file that will sit on your computer and you can copy and paste it to any external hard drive if you want to take your project on the go, for example. Now, one of the key differences is how you actually go about organizing your footage, because in Final Cut, you do it with these things called events, which are not quite folders as you know them in Premiere Pro. Events are a little bit like bins in Premiere Pro, but they actually use keywords to help you organize the footage rather than you making a bunch of bins and then labeling those bins to whatever particular category that you would prefer. Keywords are a really useful way to help you tag an entire clip itself, or you can add in and out points across a clip. And it's really cool because you can do this multiple times or as many times as you want within one clip. So you can have various moments in a clip that have a particular keyword that means something or categorizes it in a particular way. Like if we want to highlight all the parts in this clip where I'm looking particularly handsome to camera. Look at him, very sexy. You can actually make folders within each of your events, but these folders are to organize the keywords rather than to organize any specific files within your events. Like for example, if you've shot a project across multiple locations, you can just make bins for each of these locations and then organize the selects that you pull as keywords within each of these bins. So your footage is a lot more easy to navigate. Just remember that your keywords have to have a unique name within an event. So you can't have two keywords that have the same name or else Final Cut doesn't know which is which. Hence why here I've had to put selects underscore and then the location that I want it to go to. Also, you don't have to always bring up this window here because as you can see, there's a keyboard shortcut. So you can just press that on your keyboard and then that will automatically add the particular keyword that you have selected here to that part of the clip. Obviously, all this footage is shot in the same location. So let's just imagine that all of these clips here are when I was at Chris Nolan's famed and world-renowned dance academy. You have to do some inversion backwards time tenant dancing. For me, this is the beauty of Final Cut Pro because the software initially sets itself up as something that is pretty simple and straightforward, but you can really hone down on how much you want to go into the nitty-gritty of organizing all of your footage really intricately, especially if you're working on a bigger project or you just realize that it's better to work that way because as soon as you get down to your edit, you're going to be moving loads of files. You want to know where everything is, and to keep things organized with keywords is such an amazing way to do it. I personally use multiple events to help me organize any projects that I'm working on. So I'll have folders for footage, animations, sound effects, music. So I really go full on with organizing all of my footage by using events. But if you just have a very simple project with just straight up A-roll, you can literally just make one keyword that is selects and then use that to organize your footage rather than doing all of the maybe overkill stuff that I do. But hey, I like it. It helps me edit fast and that's what I like, so leave me alone, stop bullying me. Once you become a seasoned editor like myself, then you're also gonna be a stickler for having all of your projects organized like crazy. I'll quickly touch on smart collections because I think they're incredibly useful in Final Cut Pro, especially if you're gonna go and make multiple events like I usually do. Smart collections are essentially adaptive folders that look through all of your Final Cut Pro events and they will target specific clip attributes that you set up within the smart collections. For instance, let's set up a smart collection right here. So we simply click New Smart Collection. very easily labeled. And then let's just put special collection because it's very special, this one. Right now it says no items match the search criteria for the selected smart collection because we haven't set it up in any way, so it doesn't know what we want. So what we do is we click this search box and then we click this, and then we can start to give it what we want to look for. Now let's hit this plus button and then, for example, media type, and we can choose audio only, but we don't have any audio only files in here. So let's bust out some music. So let's go into this project, which is the last YouTube video that I made. Let's put all the lovely music that I got from Epidemic Sound. Shout out Epidemic Sound, sponsor me, please. So yeah, you can see now we have this event, and then you've got all the video clips and all the music clips in here. So back to our smart collection, and we see all of this audio and only the audio because we've asked it to only show us clips that only have audio and no video. And if we make another event, for example, and we have one which is music, and we move all of these audio files here, see, they're no longer visible in this event, but they're all here. You will still see them in the smart collection right here. So it's a really handy way to use multiple events and to still have a way to very quickly see an attribute in one specific smart folder, smart collection in this case. One of my favorite smart collection features is to search for specific keywords that you assign to it. And this is really useful for if you want to just have a folder that shows you all of the selects that you've pulled within a particular location or whatever particular thing that you've assigned to it. A smart collection can basically be a folder that just shows you these selects and nothing else. So for example, if we look at the event that we've made and we have our multiple locations, we can only look at these selects on their own and with nothing else if we click on these keywords within these particular locations. Because if we click on the event, we just see the clips. We see all the clips, but we don't just see the selects on their own. And the selects are actually these blue lines right here. So anytime that you see a blue line on a clip, so you see 3 on this clip that I added, 3 here, 1 there. They are all the selects that I have added. So the only way to just see these selects, so only viewing that part of the clip, the in and out points that I've added, the only way to do that is through smart collections. So let's set one up right now. We do library smart collection. So let's add this now, and then let's have a smart collection for all footage selects. And then we'll click on this box again, and then we will click keywords. What we're saying is, please show me all of these keywords. So show me any footage that I've assigned a keyword to. So the in and out points of that keyword, just show me that clip. And now if we look here, it's a lot easier to see in this view. These are just all the selects. So what we're seeing here is everything that is blue, that has a blue line above it. And that for me is just a really cool way that you can keep all of your footage really organized. And then if you really just want to go down even further down the rabbit hole of organization, smart collections are your best friend to help you navigate and very quickly help you find stuff. Because you can also do really cool things like make entire smart collections for used media. So if you have loads of footage in a timeline, you can just make a smart collection that shows you, hey, here's all the footage that you haven't actually put in your timeline yet. So it's just a really good way to help you organize and get a full understanding and a full picture of what footage you have and get it organized to a way that just makes it so much easier in your head to navigate and start doing the fun thing, which is actually editing. Now let's talk about going through your footage to find the parts that you want to use in your edit. And this is where Final Cut Pro really shines in comparison to Premiere because of the skimmer tool, which is basically a playhead that moves as you hover your mouse over any section of video. And it's just so smooth in comparison to Premiere Pro's pretty clunky playhead that they have. And just to have the ability to be able to hover your mouse over any part of your video and instantly see what's going on, I love it so much. Like, every software that I've tried that doesn't have this, I instantly feel slower. It's also why if you want to be fast with Final Cut Pro, you really need to get into the habit of pulling the selects before you actually put those clips into the timeline versus software like Premiere and DaVinci. It seems to encourage you more to put your clips into the timeline and then start to chop it and get rid of any of the sections that you don't actually want to have in your edit. I think the only reason why you can really do this in Final Cut Pro as well as the skimmer is also because the waveforms in Final Cut Pro are just so beautiful. They're so high res. you can just clearly see what's going on in your clips. And it's just really easy to see which parts where you're actually talking and doing a take to camera and which parts where you're just fumbling your line or messing up or just not saying anything at all. So let me just give you an example of how this works. So if I want to go through this footage right here and I want to pull a bunch of selects, I can either do it through this view or I can click this view, which is just a bit more zoomed in, and you can mess around with the zoom itself just to have a bit more finesse to it. Also, if you don't see the waveforms, just click this thing here and then they'll pop up. So the idea is that like I would play it back and I would go through the footage, and then what I want to do is I want to make in and out points for the selects. So I would play it back, and for example, if I liked what I was saying here, I would do a very special key combination that we haven't talked about yet called favorites. I have it assigned to Command F. And as you remember before, keywords are blue here, but this is green because the way favorites work is they're kind of like keywords light, like the simple version of a keyword where you can very quickly go through footage, select it as favorites. You don't have to mess around or think about like, what am I going to name this? Shall I name it select? You don't have to mess around with setting up a keyword. You can just very easily go through the footage and find the parts that you want and add them as favorites. So for instance, you see here that I'm clearly not saying anything. So I know that isn't footage. So the idea is that with this skimmer, the reason why it's so unbelievably fast is because you can just go through and be like, okay, like this is not footage, but this is, and then I would play back, listen to it all the way through, and I could even speed it up if I wanted to listen through it double time and say, oh, I really like that take, for example. I can just press Command F, and then I have that, and then I keep scrolling. This is all nothing, me messing up and not doing my script properly. And then here, say I watch that through and I like it. You can also turn on this, which allows you to scrub the audio as well. So you don't even have to play it back. You can literally be like, go through like this if you just don't want to play it back. So say if I like this, Command F, I like that. So I keep going through, doing that, doing that, doing that. And the idea is that you press this and click on favorites, and then every single favorite that I've just selected then exists in here. So what do? You create a new project. Normally I like to click on a clip and do it because then it will make the project settings similar to the clip itself. It's just a quicker way to do it in my opinion. Press OK, and then just delete that because it's better to do this. So just select them all, press E, and this is all the selects that I just pulled, all in the timeline. And as you can see here, if I just change the view a little bit, there's no gaps of nothing happening. Like every single one of these clips is content, like nothing else. It's just pure content, which is so much easier to start your edit from this way for me. Instead of going through the timeline and like doing ripple deletes and trying to cut it out, everything in the timeline is content. And from here, you can actually start building your edit and building the whole story and vibe of the actual video that you're trying to create. Now we're into the timeline with Final Cut Pro, or rather the project, because that's how Final Cut Pro names it. One of the things you'll probably immediately notice here is that there's no tracks. There's no like V1, V2, or even tracks for the audio like there are in Premiere. So you're probably thinking, well, what how do I possibly edit or move clips around at all if there's no tracks to define where the clips are supposed to go? Well, that's where the famous magnetic timeline of Final Cut Pro comes in. The whole idea with FCP is that because of the magnetic timeline, you don't actually need to have tracks to distinguish where clips are, because with the magnetic timeline, they'll actually stay in the positions that you want them to. Remember in Premiere Pro where you'd always have to lock tracks because if you mess around with ripple deleting or if you want to move a lot of clips all at once? Well, Final Cut Pro has a way with handling these kinds of situations with something called a primary storyline. I know I also hate the stupid weird naming that Apple does with all of its software, but just hear me out. The basics are that this track here, so track 1, is the primary storyline, and any video clips that you add above it or any audio clips that you add below it become magnetized to a certain part of this primary storyline. So let's add a clip in here, and it's above the primary storyline now. And if you look very closely right here, you see that little blue like line here. What that means is that is the point where this clip is magnetized to the primary storyline. And you can really easily see this if I do this. You can see how it's connected to it all the time. So no matter where I put this clip, I can move it at the start, but it will always stick onto wherever I've dropped it onto on top of the primary storyline. But you need to be careful because if you have a really complex and big project with multiple clips and you want to get rid of anything in your primary storyline, if you delete that, so will any clip above it that is magnetized to it. So you have to be really careful because when your project is incredibly big, it's going to be a lot harder to remember that there are clips above it. So just be careful, always double check what is magnetized to a clip before you decide to get rid of it for some reason. But if you do want to delete something, there is a really easy way to do it where you can delete like this and it creates a gap there. So it's interesting in Final Cut Pro because this gap is kind of a clip. It's like a clip with nothing else in it. So this gap, it's literally called a gap in the software, is also magnetized. You see here, it's the same, but there's just no video in it. So for whatever reason, you wanted to just keep if you wanted to keep this clip at this exact part in the timeline, so 9:24, for example, you can just still delete that A roll and have a gap, for example. And then if you want to have something different underneath here, you can very easily just drag this here and then drop it there. And then this will retain its position within the actual time code of the timeline. Also, quick note, I'm kind of jumping ahead a tiny bit here, but the way I was able to do this move was that I changed the tool from select to position, and then that allowed me to insert this clip here and have it overwrite the gap. But I'll talk about the difference between these tools very soon because they're really important. Now, what if you want to move this connection point for some reason? So say if I have the clip in between here, let's say that I don't want it to be connected to here. I want it to be connected to this one instead. So then that gives me the ability to quickly move this around, right? Because if I want this at the start instead, I can't. This is always going to move with me and I don't want that. So the really simple way to do it is you can actually change this point of magnetism. And the way to do that is you hold Option Command and you click here and you click back on the clip. And as you saw then, this is now the new connection point. So I can freely move this around and swap it, for example, and this is now connected to this clip. And yeah, it might not be so obvious what the use case of this is, but when you have a bigger project, you'll actually use this more often than you think. Now, this next part really threw me off when I first started to learn FCP because the primary storyline is not the only storyline that you can create in your project, because any clip above the primary storyline can be turned into a storyline. What the fuck does that mean, Adam? Notice that I said storyline and not primary storyline because there is a difference here. A single clip or multiple clips that we turn into a storyline still have the same magnetic connection to the primary storyline, but making it a storyline actually gives it a few magnetic properties that the primary storyline also has. So here we have 3 clips that have not been turned into a storyline yet, so they're just above the primary storyline, which, remember, this is the primary storyline. Storyline is so cheesy and lame, in my opinion. If we do a ripple delete, it'll ripple as you'd expect, but what will happen is no matter where I ripple delete at the end or at the start of these clips, it'll never close this gap up. It'll never ripple everything or magnetize everything together. Versus, for example, on the primary storyline, you see here, like it always ripples it. And again, the only way to get rid of this is to add a gap when you delete, which is a specific keyboard shortcut. But any clips above this primary storyline, you can ripple them and there is no gap there. Like a gap is not needed. So you have this dead space here, which is not a clickable thing like a gap is, for example, because a gap is literally like a clip just with no video or audio information in. And no matter what tool I use here, whether it's the selection tool or the position tool, a gap will never be created and they'll never ripple together. However, if I turn these clips into a storyline, as you can see here, this bounding box has gone on it. It will now magnetize in the same way that the primary storyline is. And if I use the selection tool to do the same thing, it will create a gap just like the primary storyline so that it always fills in to get rid of any dead space that might exist between clips. You'll actually notice that whenever you apply a transition to any clips above the primary storyline, FCP will automatically put these into a storyline so that all the clips retain their magnetism. So just to quickly recap, one of the main advantages of the storylines is that you retain the magnetism versus, as you can see here, I have the exact same clips. They're not in a storyline, so the magnetism is completely gone. Because otherwise, if we didn't turn these into a storyline, say if I wanted to chop this here, in order to fill in this gap, I will always have to drag this here and drag this there, which is, you know, it's not a crazy amount of time to do, but it's still time. And if you add those seconds up over many, many hours and many, many days of working on this software, that's all going to add up. So very easy way to magnetize, and it just keeps everything kind of a lot easier to shift around, and you just have to do one less task to physically and manually put these clips together. But another note with storylines is that if you have any clips over the top of a storyline, it's really easy to just drag down a clip and have it overwrite any section that you want within that storyline. So for example, if I have this clip here and I want to put it in between these 3 clips, you can't do it. It'll either go above, under, or you can put it like on top. So the edit point is right on top of where the cut is, but you can't put it between the gap. Like no matter what tool I use, it will not go in between these gaps. But if all of these clips are a storyline, just to know, I turn those clips into a storyline really quickly there, just because I have it hotkeyed to a particular keyboard shortcut. So now we have these into a storyline, right? Now I can slot it very easily between these gaps. And even better, which is something that I do pretty often, if you have the position tool selected, you can literally overwrite any of these clips. And you see there, now I only have this video a tiny bit in the storyline. So that's a really good use case of how to use these, where instead of stacking, because you could very easily just stack like this, right? And then when the edit plays, this just cuts and it gets shown, right? But then your timeline is just going to be really messy, and you're just going to have like stacks and stacks of layers. So I just think it's better to, unless you want to keep this as a reference point of like, maybe I'll use this clip and like kind of to audition both of them. That's one way to do it. But otherwise, just turn these into a storyline and then overwrite it. For you eagle-eyed viewers, you probably noticed that when I did that keyboard action, I actually ended up deleting a bunch of the start of this clip right here. So a shortcut that you can do to get around this problem is to delete this clip because we don't need it anymore, and select the in and out points that you want for this clip. And there's a really cool keyboard shortcut that is hidden away here called replace from start. So I have it hotkeyed here to Option R. And what you do is make sure whatever clip you want to replace is highlighted. Make sure that the start and end to go here is also highlighted. Press the keyboard shortcut and boom, it replaces that part without you having to overwrite anything. I use this all the time in my edits, and it's really hidden away in the keyboard shortcuts for some reason, but have it hotkeyed to something where you can always use it because it's going to be so useful to you, trust me. Also, if you want to do a similar overwrite option, but you want to ensure that the exact in and out point duration is copied over and overwritten on this storyline, instead of doing the replace from start option, you would do the replace option. So if I did that in this situation, you can see now it actually pushes everything that way to make sure that the start and end points are overwritten into this storyline that we've created here. But I actually don't often use this as much as I use the replace from start, because as you can see, it actually shifts the end of this whole storyline that way. So maybe that actually doesn't work for you, because then you're just showing this B-roll for much longer over this A-roll, for example. So maybe you actually don't want to do that. I mean, you could always go here and just trim it down again if you wanted to, so then you actually have the real duration shown, and then you just chop off the end of that. But yeah, just keep in mind that if you do this replace option rather than the replace from start, always check to make sure that everything hasn't shifted too far that way so it messes up the timing of your edit. One super cool trick that you can do with storylines is that you can make the duration of all the clips within a specific length, and this is really good if you want to do things like cool montage sequences. So let's highlight all of the clips within this particular storyline, right click on it and press change duration. Now you can see that the color of the time code is turned blue, and this is basically activated for us to now type in numbers here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in 50, which is 2 seconds. So 25 frames is what I shot this in, because I'm in Europe, we shoot 25 frames a second. So 25 plus 25 equals 50. Type in 50, you get 2 minutes. Maths, I got a C in maths in GCSE. It's all coming back to me now. Hit the enter button and boom, there you go. Every single clip within this storyline is 2 seconds in length. So this is such a really cool thing that you can do if you want to make a montage sequence, for example. So here, let's do 10 frames instead of 25. And then if I play it back, you know, it's just this very quick cut section of the edit that will look cool depending on what your idea is. And to hammer home the difference again between the storyline and not having a storyline on your clips, we can literally do the exact same thing to these clips when they're not in a storyline. So again, you see, so I just typed in 10, so each clip is going to be 10 frames in length. I press the enter button and they're all 10 frames in length, but there's massive gaps in between them. This is exactly the same no matter what tool I use. So I use the position tool, I do the exact same thing, 10 frames. They don't magnetize together. So this is an example of a big negative of not having clips within a storyline because they just don't magnetize together, and then you have to manually go, you go there, you go there, and it's a big waste of time versus making a storyline and it just automatically does it for you. Also remember that even if you have these clips in a storyline and you press enter, there will still be a gap between them if you have the position tool selected, not the select tool. So just keep that in mind. The tool that you use will greatly affect what the storyline does and also what the primary storyline does and how the magnetism works. So you just need to get a grip on when you use a certain tool and just to make sure that you always have either position or select activated depending on what you actually want to do in your edit. I know this software might feel like quite a lot to take in right now because it kind of is. You're basically having to reprogram your whole brain around what it means to edit and the mindsets around using a piece of editing software, because it is very different from Premiere. But trust me, like, all this is going to become second nature to you with time and practice, and you're going to realize how much more fun and most importantly how much faster Final Cut is versus Premiere Pro. Oh, what? My clothes are different and so is the background. Could it be that I was filming for so long before and then I had to go to bed and then I'm filming the day after instead? No. Nah, I go to bed at 4 a.m. every day. If you notice when I drag this audio track in here that it's a green color versus the blue color of the videos, and this color coding is how Final Cut is able to work around the fact that it doesn't have any audio or video tracks in it. And an easier way to see this is by clicking the index tab here, going to roles, and then you can see now we have 3 different roles. We have music, dialogue, video, and this line here is the dividing line that divides up audio tracks below it and then video tracks above it. You can easily add more roles to help organize your edit a lot more, so let's do that right now. So let's make a role for B-roll up here on the video roles. B-roll, I can't spell. There you go. B-roll, and then we'll also make one for SFX, so sound effects. I'll just change the color of it because I always like my sound effects to be yellow. And then let's click apply and the window closes and we go back to the project. Timeline, it's the timeline. There's one thing that Adobe got right, it's that they name things the right way. So let's add some sound effects into the project and then let's drag it in here to the timeline. And as you can see, the color is still green because Final Cut just thinks it's music. So the way that we change this is we right click, assign audio roles, click sound effects, and then boom, straight away it takes on the color of the role that we just set up. If you want to add roles to multiple clips at the same time, then you can just go up to the browser, select them, same thing, right click them, and then choose sound effects if that's the one you want. And then as soon as you drag them in, they'll all be yellow straight away. But note that if you already have a clip in your timeline and you want to change the color of it, if you right click this and let's say we want this to be a sound effect for some reason, even though it's clearly music, we press that, and then as you can see, this didn't change. But then if we add it back in from the browser, then it will change. So just keep that in mind, that it's better to already assign what it actually is in the browser before you put it in the timeline, or else you do have to spend a little extra time like right clicking and then changing the role. But of course, if you do have multiple audio tracks in your timeline, you can easily just highlight them and right click and change the audio role, and all of them will change at the same time in the timeline. Okay, let's get the clips on top here to be assigned under the new B-roll role that we created. It's a bit hard to say. So here we do B-roll, and as you can see, they don't change. Why is that? Well, this threw me off initially when I first tried to do it. The way the roll system works is that both the audio and the video have to be under the same role. So if you look here, when we click this, the audio, even though it kind of is attached to the video, it sort of isn't, because it can be separately allocated a role. So because we didn't change the role of the audio, it just stayed blue, because if we go here and go to audio roles, it still thinks it's dialogue. And you'll see this really clearly if we mute the audio. You see that we muted the audio like disappears and it becomes the orange B-roll color. But normally with B-roll, if it's on top of your A-roll, like there's no audio anyway, so you're absolutely fine doing this. Otherwise, if you wanted to change it, you would have to make another role called, let's say, for example, B-roll audio, and then you would change this, and then you press apply, and then you would apply it here, and then it would be the same color. Another thing to note though is that the audio for some reason takes priority over the video. So if your video role is video, and then you change the audio role to B-roll audio, it'll change color. I don't know why this is. I wish there was a way to have a default setting where the role changes in relation to the video and that takes the priority, but for some reason the audio is more important, which is sort of true. Audio is more important than a good video quality, but I like having both, hence why I have this microphone and this lighting. You can also separate out the audio by clicking this button as well, and then that's a maybe more intuitive way to do it than clicking on the clips. Remember, Final Cut is trying to always offer you the simplest way that you can edit your project. So if you don't want to mess around with audio lanes, you don't have to. You can just collapse it. But then if you want your interface to feel more like the traditional editing software that you might be used to, then you can very easily just collapse everything and then it's into lanes in the same way that Premiere Pro does it. So let's dive into a typical YouTube editing workflow. I've gone through and selected all the favorites that I like from this clip, and we want to add this to the timeline now. So I'm going to press the keyboard shortcut E. The default is actually Q, but I just mapped it to E because I found it much easier to press without me having to do like finger gymnastics. Now it's great again because everything here is actually content that I want to use, but there are still small gaps of me finishing off a sentence. So we want to tidy all of those up with J-cuts so that the audio from the next shot can be heard slightly before we actually see the image on screen. And if I drag this video in here to do that, the video and the audio are connected. It's cutting into the video. We don't want to do this. This is exactly what I mean by Final Cut trying to offer you the simplest solution for your edit first. Because for a simple video, you might actually not want to mess around with J-cuts. And in that case, then you don't need to see the video and audio lanes separately. But if we do want a J-cut, we just press the index button, show audio lanes, and then now you can see that the video and the audio are in separate lanes or tracks. And then now when we drag, you can see that the audio dynamically moves and shifts its position from audio track 1 to audio track 2 to allow us to get in that J-cut just before that clip begins. And that's just one of the beautiful things about FCP, because it's really easy to get your footage to a pro-looking place. And especially because the waveforms are just so rich and high quality. In fact, let's make them even more easy to see. So let's press this button up here, and then we can adjust the size a lot if we want to make them massive. Because oftentimes like this, we can just J-cut by looking at the waveforms rather than reviewing the playback. Now, if you want to be even more efficient with Final Cut Pro, I'd recommend that you download this free plugin called Command Post. Some of you might be familiar with the Mac software Alfred, where you can quickly search files on your computer. Well, Command Post is basically FCP's version of this. So if I want to add a visual transition between these two clips, what I'd normally have to do is go into this transitions window, choose the one that I want to use, and then I would have to drag it on, and then it would do the transition for me. Pretty terrible transition, but you get the idea. But with Command Post, I just click on where I want the transition to happen, press the keyboard shortcut to bring up the window. So for me, it's Shift Space. And then I just type in the transition that I want. So let's put jump down. So yeah, it was jump down left. Press enter, and then here it is right away. The terrible elastic transition. Now it's not like double the speed doing it this way versus the other way, but you are saving a second here or there, and obviously if you use this a lot, those seconds are going to slowly add up into minutes and hours and even days eventually. So it's definitely still worth just shaving off a few seconds from actions that you're going to be doing a lot when you use this software. There's also a cool HUD that you can bring up where you can hotkey certain effects, and sometimes this is actually even quicker than typing in the effect itself. For instance, if I want to add my custom yellow border that you've probably seen in some of my other videos, then I just press the keyboard shortcut to bring up my HUD, find it in this menu and I click it, and then instantly it gets added to it. I recommend getting to grips with all of the basics that I previously showed before you go ahead and download this plugin, because otherwise you might be a little bit overwhelmed with all of the stuff that you're trying to remember with the software. But I just thought I'd showcase how Command Post works, just so you know that there is actually an even faster way to maximize your workflow. Now let's kick into how you can make the audio in your videos sound good. There's a bunch of ways that you can change the volume of any clip in your timeline. So one way to do it is to click on the clip itself and then go up to this little speaker symbol and then just slide this volume slider, and the waveforms will dynamically adjust to represent the volume change. And again, I'm saying this many times, but I just love the waveforms in this software. They're just so nice and so smooth how they adjust, and so high quality. Honestly, just look at DaVinci and Premiere Pro's waveforms and compare them to this. It's night and day. Final Cuts are so much better. And then if you want to adjust the volume on multiple clips, you can just select them all and then go back up here to the speaker tool and then just slide it to whatever level you see fit. Now, if you're working on a longer project, it's going to get pretty annoying for you to have to constantly highlight all of the audio in order for you to be able to add on a compressor or an EQ to make your audio sound even better, which is pretty much why I'll always turn my main storyline track into a compound clip once I've finished J-cutting all of the A-roll. So then if I add any audio effects onto this, it's going to apply to all of the audio clips within the compound. Because Apple also make the music software Logic Pro, all of the plugins in FCP for audio are just so well designed. I mean, look at this EQ and compressor versus Premiere's. It's hideous in comparison. And yeah, you could argue that aesthetics don't matter, because if a plugin's really good, then it's really good, so who cares what it looks like or how it makes you feel? Well, Final Cut Pros are aesthetically way nicer and they work a lot better. It's all the little things that add up to big things with editing software. And unless you're working on really high-end projects, you're gonna have to be the grader, assembly editor, sound mixer, everything basically. And each of these things that you're gonna be doing in the software should be as enjoyable and pain-free as they possibly can be, especially when you're gonna be doing the ones that you really don't enjoy that much at all. Like for me, assembly editing, my God, it's so tedious. But FCP kind of makes me hate it a lot less than I used to do when I was using Premiere Pro to do it, because of the speed of the skimmer, the seamless scrubbing, and the high-res waveforms. Right off the bat, I'm gonna give a 1-up to Premiere Pro right now, because I actually prefer the interface of Lumetri more than I do the color grading workflow in Final Cut Pro. It's a bit more logical to the art of actually going about and grading a video with. However, the main issue that I have with Lumetri is that, how should I put this? The sliders suck. And honestly, for some reason, I always find that I have to do way more work when I'm grading S-Log footage in Lumetri to get it to where I actually want it to be versus in FCP. And when I started grading with Final Cut Pro and researching into this a little bit more, I think there's actually a problem with Premiere Pro's color grading algorithms. I'm not sure if there's any hard science or facts to back this up. I've just read a few Reddit posts and blogs that people have had a similar experience to me. So it could just be a whole big Apple placebo effect as far as I'm concerned. But hey, if it makes me a better color grader, then more placebos, please, Apple. With FCP's color, you can't rename grade layers like you can with Lumetri, which is a bit dumb in my opinion. Come on, Apple, just let us rename in a future update, please. But you can reorder them, which is the most important thing that you need to help you grade well. My usual grading workflow is to have 4 layers, and they start from top to bottom. So the highest one is the one that the video goes through first, and then the bottom one is the final grade that is applied to the particular video, which is why you want to do all of your primary exposure and white balance adjustments on the first clip, because the further down that pipeline you go, the harder it is to make all of these adjustments, because you'll have less control with the original image, like if you want to bring down some highlights because they're a bit blown out in your original clip. The second layer I add is a conversion LUT to transform the image from S-Log free to a Rec 709 color space. For those of you that don't know, this is just a color space that helps your image look pretty natural looking, especially when you've shot it in a really flat profile like S-Log. The third layer is where I start to set my contrast in the image, and the fourth layer is for my final color corrections, and this is where I move the sliders around in the color wheels just to push the image to a certain color that I feel like is appropriate for the particular clip. There's also a bunch of other correction tools that you'll be familiar with from Lumetri Color, things like hue sack curves and color curves where you can really dial in your image. So coming from Premiere to Final Cut, color correction is not going to be a big difference to you. The only thing you have to remember is that you can't rename clips, and the UI is maybe not quite as organized and intuitive as Lumetri is, but I promise you that once you move those sliders around in FCP, you will never want to go back to Premiere's Lumetri. Just look how smooth these are. Oh yes, up and down, so smooth. Just like the image, look at it, it's adjusting so perfectly. I love it so much. It makes me cry every time. Here's a few shortcuts that I would really recommend you try and learn off by heart once you start moving into learning more of the software. Because being fast in this software is going to be incredibly difficult if you don't have these down. I'm just going to fire through how Final Cut Pro names these very useful and often used shortcuts that you're probably using all the time in Premiere Pro. Close both the browser and inspector window so you can see your video bigger. This is really useful if you're working on a smaller screen like a laptop on the go and you want to quickly just enlarge your video just to get a better look at it. Ripple all the clips into the playhead. The easiest way that I do this is just to press Command A to select all the clips and then press whatever your trim tool is, and then it'll ripple everything to the playhead. J-cutting footage. Nudge right and nudge left are the shortcuts to do this in Final Cut Pro, and it's really easy to just click on the edge of a video and then slowly move your clip a little bit in whichever direction just to really line up that J-cut properly. Command delete to properly remove any files from your browser, because if you just press delete, it'll just assign a clip as rejected, which is the opposite of it being favorited. So if you really want to actually remove an entire file out of your project, then just press Command delete and then it's actually properly deleted from your project. Delete on a through edit. This is one that I only figured out a few days ago, surprisingly, which is that if you cut a clip in half, you'll see that it has these little dotted lines next to it, and that represents a through edit, which means that it's not really a cut because you've not changed the duration or shifted it around. But if you want to get rid of that, just click on the actual through edit itself and delete it, and then it will delete that original cut that you did, and it will make your timeline look nice and tidy and way less confusing with a bazillion cuts that you accidentally made and then never tried to fix or sort out. Like this ugly timeline, for example, which is incredibly confusing to navigate because there's a mixture of actual cuts and dumb cuts that I made because I've tried to do something and then I've changed my mind and now it looks ugly. Raise or lower the volume by 1 decibel. There's a bunch of times where you'll want to adjust the level of your audio, but you don't want to use your mouse to do it. So this is a really easy way with your keyboard to just quickly increase or decrease any of the volume in the tracks that you have. Zoom to fit. This is just really easy if you have a longer timeline and you're zoomed in and then you just want to get a whole preview of what your full timeline looks. Just hit this shortcut and then your timeline will just fit to the length of the whole project in its entirety. Duplicating a compound clip. To duplicate a compound clip or a nest as it is in Premiere, you have to use this keyboard shortcut clip reference. The easiest way to do this is press Option and then drag up a compound clip so then it duplicates, and then press clip reference, and then anything that you change within that compound won't affect the original compound clip. Because if you don't do this and you simply Option drag and then duplicate the compound clip, it's actually not really duplicated, and if you mess around with anything in that, it'll affect the original compound clip as well. So clip reference will be your best friend to use your previous compound clip as sort of a template that you can swap the B-roll in and tweak it, and then you don't have to go about rebuilding the whole thing. I was so frustrated with this software when I picked it up for the first time. I moved out of a life where every single time I was about to sit down to start editing a project, I would always just be dreading all of the weird technical issues that Premiere was going to throw my way. And honestly now, I love opening up a new FCP project and getting ready to sit down and craft the story or narrative that I'm trying to convey. It's not perfect, and Apple certainly have a lot of room for improvement in terms of features in relation to the whole workflow of the software. Please, Apple, let me hear the sound from the main timeline when I'm inside a compound clip so then I can adjust the video timings to suit all the sound effects that I have in the main timeline. Price-wise, you are going to save money moving from Premiere to Final Cut, but it's not going to be completely priceless because it costs about $300 now to download FCP. But you do get a 90-day free trial to really get to grips with how the software even works, and trust me, you're going to need it, especially the first week or two, because it's going to be a struggle, but hopefully this video really helped make that process a bit easier for you. There's also software like DaVinci, which is completely free, and to be honest, the features in it are really tempting. I'm even making a video right now where I play around with what DaVinci is like in comparison to both Premiere and Final Cut, and it is really tempting, so maybe that could be a move that I'll make in the future, but for now, the speed in Final Cut Pro seems to be pretty unmatched by anything else out there on the market. And Adobe, thank you for helping me even get into editing in the first place, because I've been using Premiere since I was 16 years old pretty much. With a hacked version of the software that I got because I didn't have any money when I was younger. I'm sorry. Don't tell Adobe. But it's time to move on, and I would consider moving back if you make your software really good and rewrite it from the ground up. So I guess I'll wait until that happens. And I believe in second chances, so even you guys, Adobe, Mr. and Mrs. Adobe, I'll give you a second chance when the time feels appropriate. I'm considering making an even more in-depth FCP video series where I go into different workflow types, especially for filmmakers and content creators, exploring things like multicamming, how to handle multiple audio levels within multiple compound clips, things like tracking, how I do certain things in my particular YouTube edits, and a lot more. So if you guys would find find that to be something useful to you, then let me know in the comments below. Speaking of Apple, if you want to know how they shoot their incredibly cinematic keynote events, then you can check out this other video on my channel right here. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because if you don't, your laptop is going to spontaneously combust the next time you try to open Premiere Pro. Maybe. Probably not. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.